What is up, Janksters? It's your boy Graham, also known as HamHawks42 on the internet, and we have more Dominaria United spoilers. We're going to be getting into them. I have a number of spoilers that I want to talk about that were released like today and yesterday since the last video, and we are going to start things off with the card that has me the most excited on a number of different levels. For one, it's an incredibly impactful story beat. This is a part of a lot of our childhoods that is getting wrecked by the phyrexians, and that's very impactful. And it just so also happens to be on a bomb mythic that I think is downright excellent, and that is Weatherlight Compleated. This is a 5/5 flying vehicle for 2. Artifact for 2, that's relevant, just putting that out there. As long as Weatherlight Compleated has 4 or more phyrexians counters on it, it's a phyrexian creature in addition to its other types. Note, this does not have a crew cost. Having 4 phyrexians counters is the only way to turn this into a creature. And once it is a creature, it stays a creature unless those counters are removed. So keep that in mind. Whenever a creature you control dies, put a phyrexians counter on Weatherlight Compleated. Then draw a card if it has 7 or more phyrexians counters on it. If it doesn't, scry 1. So what this says, for 2 mana, every time a creature you control dies, you scry 1. And you put a counter on this thing. Once you put 4 counters on it, you have a 5/5 flying body. So once 4 of your things die, you've got a 5/5 flyer on board. Great. Once 7 or more of your things die, you also start drawing cards off this. So this is kind of like the best morbid opportunist style effect we've seen in a very long time. Those scries are very relevant. So when your creatures are dying, either dying in combat or they're getting blown up by board wipes or you're sacrificing them, what's happening is you're getting value by being able to scry your top, the top of your library, and that can happen as many times during a turn as you have creatures that die. So that can be downright excellent. On top of that, you then get a 5/5 body once you've had some critters die, and you then draw cards later. I mean, in any situation where creatures are going to be dying, this is fantastic. Not just like pretty good. This is fantastic. We're also in a situation where we've talked about a lot of artifacts matter cards. We have Karn, like we talked about yesterday. There's Joyra. You have even Tezzeret, Betrayer of Flesh, things like that that are in this format that are trying to make artifact synergies work. Meanwhile, we don't have that many great just artifacts that are just great artifacts being artifacts. Well, here's one. This is a phenomenal 2-drop. You can cheat it in with Joyra. You can animate it with Tezzeret. It ups your affinity count for Reality Heist. I mean, it does all the things that you want by virtue of just being an artifact. And then it's also going to be giving you scries. It's going to be drawing you cards. I think this can see play even outside of Artifact Matters decks. This could see play in any deck with a lot of creatures. Because if your opponent wipes the board, think about it, if you've got 4 creatures online and you're threatening lethal, your opponent can play out their Depopulate or their Meathook Massacre, wipe the board. All of a sudden, yeah, all your 4 creatures die. That sucks, but you get 4 instances of scry 1. So you get to scry 4 deep until you find a card you want. Sweet. And you get a 5/5 flyer in the mix. And that's assuming it didn't have any phyrexians counters on it to begin with. So all of a sudden, you were maybe threatening lethal off 4 little bodies, and then now all of a sudden they've got a 5/5 flyer they still need to tangle with. So it may still not be lethal, but if you're in a situation where they're not out of the woods yet, you still have a threat on board that they need to deal with immediately, and you have card selection going into your next turn. Like, this is sweet. I love this card. I think it's absolutely fantastic. This is a day 1 craft on Arena, in my opinion. Like, just get your hands on this. It's great. Yeah. All right, next up, we have Urborg Lhurgoyf. And no, I am not going to say that 3 times fast because I know I would fail horribly. So this is the Lhurgoyf of the set. I love it when we go back to Dominaria and we get a fresh Lhurgoyf. It's one of those creature types. It was kind of a joke for a long time, but obviously certain cards like Tarmogoyf did elevate the Goyf into more of a legitimate spot in the game. And this creature is very much in line with that. So it is a star/1+ star for 1 and a green with kicker blue and or black. So if you're in Sultai, you're good to go. As Urborg Lhurgoyf enters the battlefield, mill 3 cards for each time it was kicked. Urborg Lhurgoyf's power is equal to the number of creature cards in your graveyard, and its toughness is equal to that number plus 1. So it's not like Tarmogoyf. It doesn't care about the types. It cares about the number of creatures. So if you're in a situation where you are already filling your graveyard full of creatures with, say, old stick fingers, or you have other synergies that can pull from your graveyard, reanimator style shenanigans, if you're in the kind of deck that likes Mire Triton or Undead Butler already to help, or Stitcher Supplier in older formats to just fill your graveyard with stuff, Urborg Lhurgoyf can absolutely capitalize on that. And Urborg Lhurgoyf, I'm going to just keep trying to say this, it has some phenomenal things going for it. Most of the time with cards that care about stuff in your graveyard like this, it either is a payoff card, like we see with Tarmogoyf, or it's a setup card like we see with Stitcher Supplier. Urborg Lhurgoyf is both on one card. If you spend 4 mana on this, you mill 6 cards. In a deck that cares about its graveyard, that is a big mill. You can hit a lot with that. And there is a lot of Graveyard Matters stuff out there in Standard right now. We have Cemetery Tampering. We have there's Angel of Suffering that can help mill you cards. We have old stick fingers, like I mentioned, Rutstein. There are ways to take advantage of your graveyard, and I think this card is just sweet. I dig the effects. I dig the style, and this is a gigantic creature your opponent needs to dance with. They need to have a way to answer it. And then what's cool is if you're running Reanimator shenanigans, once they answer this, you reanimate your Titan of Industry, and then they have to answer that, and it's just delightful. So I love it. I think this is a great setup piece that I'm absolutely going to play. So it's just cool. It's just good for what it does. All right, next up. Whoop. We have a goofy tab. Sorry about that. All right. Next up, we have Timeless Lotus. This is a legendary artifact for 5. Now, we knew there was going to be a card with Lotus in the name in the set. Like so many others, I had assumed that it would somehow tap to add 3 mana of some kind. We were all wrong. Timeless Lotus is a legendary artifact for 5. It enters the battlefield tapped, and you tap to add Urborg. 1 mana of every single color. So I was concerned about running 5-color decks in Standard post-rotation because we are losing the World Tree. World Tree is a great piece of mana fixing. Once you have 6 lands, all your lands tap for any color, and that is just really useful to be able to access all 5 colors consistently to hit things like Kami War or pre-rotation, the Prismatic Bridge, those kinds of things. And, or the card draw off of the Courier's Briefcase. There's a lot of Urborg effects out there, and being able to access all 5 colors can be very powerful, and that's something that's relevant. Well, Timeless Lotus gives us that perfectly. Also, the stock on Teferi who slows the sunset, in my opinion, if it's not, if it hasn't jumped significantly as a direct result of this card entering the format, I would be shocked. Because the moment you have Teferi who slows the sunset down, you stick a Timeless Lotus for 5, you can untap it immediately, and it basically pays for itself, and then the following turn you have double Urborg. The amount of stuff that you can do with that mana, not to mention whatever else is in your mana base, is kind of bonkers. So the sheer amount, the sheer volume of mana that this deck is going to be able to produce, or any deck with Timeless Lotus in it in the late game, is really insane. If you have a good top end something to pump that mana into, you're off to the races, and Timeless Lotus can absolutely help you get there. So this is a really great card. It's a 5 mana rock. It does enter the battlefield tapped, but it taps for 5 mana. I don't know what else to say. This thing's incredible. It's going to be an EDH staple day one. And, we are talking, I've talked a lot in past videos about how important it's going to be for Artifacts Matter decks to be able to stick, to be relevant in the format, because we have things like Tezzeret, Joyra, the Karn Living Legacy. In order for artifacts to be relevant, we need to have these good support pieces. Well, we have a lot of good support pieces, but we also need good artifacts. Well, here's one. And we talked about Weatherlight earlier. Some of the artifacts are looking pretty good. So we just might be in for a Standard that has maybe multiple artifact style decks. And I think Timeless Lotus could be a piece of one of those. It's just, it's crazy. That said, I don't know if it's going to make any waves in competitive play simply because it costs 5 and it enters the battlefield tapped. So unless there is a dedicated Teferi style like control deck that can pay this off with Kami War or something like that, unless that is viable, I don't expect this to necessarily see competitive play, but I could be wrong on that. But it's definitely going to see a lot of play in Janky Brews. So I'm going to definitely be tinkering with it. But anyway, it's good stuff. I like this card. I like it a lot. And if you're in 5-color Commander, just do it. Just get your hands on it. All right, next up, we have Stronghold Arena. Now, when I first saw this card, I immediately assumed it was some kind of Phyrexian Arena style reprint. I was completely wrong, but that's okay. It is an enchantment for 1 and a black with kicker green and or kicker white. I like this like quasi multicolor, multi-kicker thing that they're doing here. I like it. In any event, when it enters the battlefield, you gain 3 life for each time it was kicked. So if you spend 4 mana in Abzan, you gain 6 life off it. Okay. But then it's an enchantment. Whenever 1 or more creatures you control deal combat damage to a player, you may reveal the top card of your library and put it into your hand. If you do, you lose life equal to its mana value. In a deck that is running a lot of small creatures that are trying to be aggressive, this could be excellent. Again, not just like kind of okay, but truly excellent. That's great. Now, the loss of life is very real. You need to be aware of that. But if the things you're hitting off the top are primarily lands or 1 or 2 drops, then that life loss is going to be pretty negligible. If you have a lot of really big creatures, or big permanents in that deck, I would be very hesitant to run this card. However, one of the challenges that low to the ground aggro decks face is running out of gas in the late game. That said, is there going to be an Abzan aggro deck? I doubt it, to be honest. Orzhov aggro deck, maybe. Running cards like Wedding Announcement and, a number of powerful powerful white creatures like Intrepid Adversary, for example, in a go wide situation could fit in that deck nicely because the mana value off the top is only 2, but you could sink up to 6 mana in it and still get value. So I don't know, there's some cool synergies here. I think this card is a way to be drawing cards in your aggressive decks, which I think is cool, but it's in a color combination that, green and white. Green, white, and black, they each do aggressive things on their own, so there might be a deck that could work with this. I think it's cool design. It's cool design. Getting a Dark Confidant every time you slap somebody, I'll take it. All right. Next up, we have Temporary Lockdown. This is a card that I think is going to see a lot of play, especially in Enchantment Matters decks. Well, actually, maybe not, because a lot of those Enchantment Matters decks have a lot of low-cost creatures. Anyway, Temporary Lockdown is an enchantment for 1 white. When Temporary Lockdown enters the battlefield, exile each non-land permanent with mana value 2 or less until Temporary Lockdown leaves the battlefield. So I just answered my own question there as I was going through this. This is a sideboard card. This has the potential to be a very powerful sideboard card. If your opponent has a lot of tokens, this just wipes them all like really effectively, unless they're token copies of another card that has a mana value higher than 2. Be aware of that. Like Scoot Swarm tokens don't get hit by this, but they're rotating out of standard, so we don't need to worry about that. However, treasure tokens do, as well as, your Goblin Shaman tokens from Fable of the Mirror Breaker. You've got, Tenacious Underdogs. You've got, we have amazing 1-drops for days in the format right now, as well as 2-drops. Your Blood Death Harvesters and whatnot. The Adversary that I was talking about a second ago. Temporary Lockdown has a lot of very good targets right now. This can hit a lot of stuff. And so I would be shocked if it doesn't see play. If it sees main deck play, it's probably going to be in control style decks as like a 2 of, with the other 2 copies in the sideboard is going to be my guess. I think this is going to be primarily a sideboard card, but in a matchup where it's impactful, whoo boy, it's going to be impactful. So keep an eye out for this card. I think it's a cool design. It also gives 2 white devotion, which is not relevant in standard right now, but in older formats that might be something. So I like it. I think it's a cool design. Yeah, this is the ultimate portable hole. It's just, don't take that quote out of context, please. All right, next up, we have Defiler of Faith. This is a Phyrexian human 5/5 vigilance for 3 white. As an additional cost to cast white permanent spells, you may pay 2 life. Those spells cost 1 white less to cast if you pay life this way. This effect reduces only the amount of white mana you pay. Whenever you cast a white permanent spell, create a 1/1 white soldier creature token. So in the situations where you're trying to go wide, this could be very, very good. You'll notice this is part of a cycle. Now, we talked about Defiler of Vigor last time. That card is absolutely insane, and I feel like Defiler of Faith has an opportunity to also be freaking insane. The fact that it's a human is very relevant. We have Selesnya humans is already an archetype that is supported with some other cards in the format. So I wouldn't be surprised if Defiler of Faith slots into that, like, maybe not day one, and definitely not as a 4-of, I don't think, because it is a 5-drop after all. It's a 5-drop setup piece, because once you have this on board, then all of a sudden your white humans, your smaller creatures, become cheaper to play. You do have to spend life, but you're in white, you're probably going to be gaining life anyway, so that's not that big of a deal. Like with Soul Warden style effects where you're gaining life as creatures are entering the battlefield, this is practically free because it's putting, that cost reduction is effectively free, because, I mean, imagine, so you have a Hopeful Initiate in hand, you play a Defiler of Faith, you have some kind of Soul Word effect like a Veteran Lunarch, for example, and you cast out so you pay 2 life, cast a Hopeful Initiate, a 1-drop from your hand. So it's free, you just pay 2 life, boom, it's on the field. The Defiler of Faith produces a token. You gain 1 life off that. Then the Hopeful Initiate enters the battlefield. You gain 1 life off that. You have now spent effectively 0 life and 0 mana to put an additional 2 bodies on the board. So those kinds of lines are going to be possible with this thing, and I think that has the potential to be incredibly powerful. So in the right kind of shell that can gain life, that can also support a go-wide strategy with a lot of cheap white permanents that you can be dropping, for even less once this is on the field, I think the sky's the limit for this card. So I like it. I think it's very powerful. The biggest knock against it is the fact that it's a 5-drop. If this was even a 4/4 for 4, it would be significantly better. Being limited to playing it out on 5, or once we have 5 mana, is definitely an issue. It definitely hampers the power of this card significantly because it doesn't get to show up early in the game. So that is definitely a bummer, but it has the opportunity to be a pretty devastating haymaker in that late game. So I dig it. I think it's a cool card. I think the whole Defiler cycle, with the possible exception of the blue one, which we haven't actually covered because, to be honest, I find it that underwhelming. So far, the Defiler cycle looks really good. We haven't seen all of them yet, but the ones we have seen so far, just delicious. All right, next up, this is a beautiful card. It's a beautiful thing. I have known of this card for about 3 hours as of this recording, and I will be heartbroken if anything happens to this poor little chick. This is Phoenix Chick. 1/1 flying haste for 1. Phoenix Chick can't block, because, you have a 1/1 flying haste for 1, so that's fine. Whenever you attack with 3 or more creatures, you may pay red. If you do, return Phoenix Chick from your graveyard to the battlefield, tapped and attacking with a +1/+1 counter on it. The design on this card is incredible. If mono red aggro is a thing, this is a 4-of immediately. Like, full stop, no question, it just is. Frankly, even in like gorilla aggro situations where you want to be attacking really early with stuff, I think this could still fit. I mean, it's just great. The fact that it gives you a hasty, evasive body right out the gate is phenomenal, and if your opponent does manage to dance with it, if you do manage to take it out, later in the game as you're attacking, if you have extra mana, all of a sudden you just get it back, and it's bigger. Like, I think this card is great. Like, this is just absolutely fantastic. I think we are going to see a lot of mono red decks debating on whether or not to play out Phoenix Chick on 1 or Kumano faces Kakazan on 1. I think those two are going to be in the exact same deck, and they're going to be the 1-drops of choice. To be honest, I'd probably go Kumano, because then this would come in as a 2/2, depending on what my 2-drop was in hand. Anyway, this card's fantastic. You're going to see it all over the place. In red aggro decks, this is the thing. Like, it just is. This is the 1-drop. It's fantastic. I have no other words. And it's an uncommon, so it's easy to craft. You're gonna probably crack a couple if you open any packs on Arena, and it's probably gonna be relatively inexpensive in paper. So, yeah, card's great, love it. All right, next up we have Ratadrabik of Urborg. Ratadrabik of Urborg. What is up with all the Urborg stuff having weird names? Anyway. This is a 3/3 Vigilance Ward zombie wizard for 2 white-black. You give me zombie stuff in white-black, I'm listening. Other zombies you control have vigilance. That's dope. I like that. Whenever another legendary creature you control dies, create a token that's a copy of that creature, except it's not legendary and it's a 2/2 black zombie in addition to its other colors and types. This card has a lot of phenomenal stuff going for it, and this style of effect is one I absolutely adore. So I'm a huge fan of the Luminous Broodmoth from Ikoria that allows you, whenever a non-flying creature dies, it comes back with flying. And the Soul Herder from Theros Beyond Death is another great card that when a creature dies, you can exile it from your graveyard to get a 1/1 token that's a copy of it, which obviously you can do some crazy things with ETB triggers and all kinds of nastiness with that. This card is very similar, but it only works on legends. So that's something to keep in mind. That said, it's also just a good buff for your zombies. So if you have a deck that cares about zombies with things like Champion of the Perished, this all of a sudden works beautifully. And if you're in a situation where you have any legendary zombies, like any kind of commander situation, holy cow, let's go! Because then you get the vigilance bonus even before they die, and then when they do die, you get to have a 2/2 zombie token in addition to the other colors and types. It's like, and you get all the benefits of that legendary. But unlike all the other cards that I can think of that have had an effect like this, Ratadrabik, I think I got that, Ratadrabik lets the card stay in your graveyard. So if, for example, you have Thalia, and you sacrifice Thalia to a Deadly Dispute, you can reanimate Thalia. You now have 2 Thalias, one of which is a 2/2 zombie. And so now all non-creature spells cost 2 additional, not just 1. Like that, and that is a very base case. Like, that's a really simple case. Like, the amount of stuff we're gonna be able to do with this is awesome. Absolutely awesome. I love it. I think this is begging to be made into some kind of weird janky brew. I'm definitely going to be doing this. I can't wait. On top of that, cards like Mirror Box could work really nicely with this. Like, we could do some kind of weird legendary tribe something in Orzhov, leveraging like ETB triggers. I don't know exactly how it's going to work yet. I'll tell you right now, Weatherlight's going in that deck though, because they're going to be sacrificing stuff. So I think this card's a house. I can't wait to get my hands on it. This style of effect is something that you can't sleep on. Like, so just be aware of it. I think there's something to it. It is limited in that it only hits legendary creatures, but we're in a set that cares about legendary creatures, and there are going to be a lot of new legends added to this format. So I think there's going to be something here. All right, next up, we have Hurler Cyclops. So this is actually kind of appropriate that we're talking about Hurler Cyclops immediately following Ratadrabik, because in order to take advantage of those kind of recursive effects like Ratadrabik, one of these days I'll get, one of those is going to be right, one of those pronunciations. In order to take advantage of those recursion effects that when a creature dies, it returns, or when creatures die, something happens, in order to take advantage of those effects, we need good sack outlets. We're in a situation where our best sacrifice outlets in right now in Deadly Dispute and Village Rites are going to be rotating out of the format. So we're going to have to find other ways to sacrifice our stuff if we want to be triggering our Weatherlights, if we want to be recurring stuff with Ratadrabik, if we want to be reanimating stuff. Like, sacrifice is something that we're still probably going to want to do. Hurler Cyclops does provide a sacrifice outlet. So for 3 red, you get a 5/4 Cyclops at uncommon with the ability pay 1, sacrifice another creature. Hurler Cyclops deals 1 damage to any target. Now, this may seem very underwhelming because we've seen situations like Zeatora, for example, where you sacrifice a creature, or Surtland Flinger even, where you sacrifice a creature and then you deal damage equal to that creature's power, which is obviously significantly better than just 1 damage. I mean, unless you're sacrificing 0 power creatures, but I mean, yeah, in any event. So Hurler Cyclops is, it seems unassuming, but if we don't have another good sack outlet, this might actually be something we lean on. And in limited, you cannot count out this effect. Like, don't forget about this, because in limited, I think this card is going to be really strong. Like, maybe not amazing, but it's going to give red aggressive decks not only a 5-power creature that's on the board that the opponent has to dance with, but on top of that, it gives the ability to chip in for that last little bit of damage that you need to close the game out. So I think that's actually really solid. I mean, it's basically like Weaponize the Monsters or Goblin Bombardment, where, you know, you sack things and deal damage. So I feel like the card is solid, actually. I feel like this thing is interesting. It's a fine design. It's not, I don't think this is gonna light the world on fire, but unless we come up with better sacrifice outlets in standard, I might be running this thing. We'll see. We'll see. All right, next up, we have Warhost's Frenzy. Ooh, now this I definitely want to include in that sack deck too. So instant for 2 and a red with kicker for 1 black. Creatures you control get +2/+0 until end of turn. If this spell was kicked, whenever a creature you control dies this turn, draw a card. If you're familiar with Burn Bright, this is going to look very similar. Burn Bright is an instant where all your creatures get +2/+0. And I believe it costs 3. So this is like just a straight up upgrade on Burn Bright. Classic design, beautiful like red combat trick that often results in you winning the game. But if it doesn't, because of that kicker, if you're in Rakdos or any combination where Rakdos is part of it, you know, then all of a sudden, yeah, I'm guessing some Mardu decks could you take advantage of this. In any event, then all of a sudden, not only are you chipping in for significantly more damage, you know, 2 additional damage for every creature that's attacking, but as those creatures die in combat, you then draw cards. That's just dope. I love that. Like, because those red aggressive decks, like, they're goblin decks that would just absolutely adore being able to get cards just by having their creatures die. Like, I think that's absolutely fantastic. And on top of that, we're in red-black. We're in a situation where you may want post-combat, if you have a lot of mana lying around, if it's really late in the game, post-combat, you might want to Meat Hook Massacre your own board to deal damage to your opponent. Well, usually you only do that when it's going to be lethal. But with this down, it might actually be worth it to do that pre-lethal. Because then you're in a situation where you dome your opponent for a bunch of damage, and you draw a bunch of cards. And again, you could get a bunch of Weatherlight triggers. Just throwing that out there. I'm telling you, Weatherlight Compleated. Don't sleep on that card. It's going to be great. So, you know, I think this card is excellent. Again, and with anything with sack outlets. I mean, like I'm saying, this card wants you to be sacrificing your stuff, or you wants that stuff to be dying in combat. For 4 mana, all creatures get +2/+0, and whenever one of your creatures dies, you draw a card. Sweet. Absolutely sweet. I dig it. I think this is a killer combat trick. In limited, this is going to blow some people out. And I think even in constructed, there's some people are going to get got by this card. I dig it. I think it's really cool. All right, next up, we have a legendary uncommon in Queen Allenal of Ruadach. Ruadach? I don't know why I'm like deciding to that, or like, anyway, choke on that. They are a star elf for green, white. Queen Allenal of Ruadach's power and toughness are each equal to the number of creatures you control. Bare minimum 1/1 if she's the only one out, because she does count herself. If 1 or more creature tokens would be created under your control, those tokens plus a 1/1 white soldier creature token are created instead. There are a lot of decks out there that are creating tokens right now. That's not uncommon. And so on top of that, here we are. This produces a ton of additional tokens. Now, it is important to note that the tokens are, this is a replacement trigger. So what happens is you create the token, this comes out, this replaces the initial trigger. So you get those tokens plus an additional 1. That's it. It doesn't like loop on itself, even if you combine it with things like Ginny Fae, because that was the first thing I thought of, was like, well, what if I replace the 1/1 token with something else? Does she trigger again? It's not going to work that way. Fun thought, though. But in any event, we already have a ton of token generating things out there. And again, we have cards like Ginny Fae that care about tokens being generated that can turn them into token creatures. So all of a sudden, any creature tokens, you basically just get an additional token just cause. So if you're going wide, if you want to create a lot of things, I mean, there are a lot of cards out there that create citizen tokens from Streets of New Capenna. We have things like Wedding Announcement, which is seeing a ton of play all over the place with good reason. The card's insane. We even have cards like Fable the Mirror Breaker that just casually creates a creature token. We don't even necessarily think of it as a creature token. I don't know. I mean, obviously it's a creature token, but you don't think of it as like a token generator card. You think of it as a card that does a ton of stuff, one of which just happens to be creating a creature token. There are a lot of cards like that right now that are incidentally creating creature tokens, and we're seeing even more of those in this set because clearly creature token creation is a theme for limited. And as a result, we see cards like Queen Allenal. So I think this card is cool. I think we're going to see a lot of those. If I'm not mistaken, this is the Selesnya Signpost uncommon for limited. I could be wrong on that, but I think it's cool. I think it's just a neat card. It does the thing. It's also an elf. So that's relevant if you're in Selesnya elves. Yeah, good stuff. All right, next up, we have another signpost uncommon in Rulik Mons Warren Chief. For 1 red, green, green, we have a legendary goblin, 3/3 with Menace. Whenever Rulik Mons Warren Chief attacks, look at the top card of your library. If it's a land card, you may put it onto the battlefield tapped. If you didn't put a card onto the battlefield this way, create a 1/1 red goblin creature token. So again, we have a situation where we're creating goblins, or we're creating tokens. So this actually would synergize really well with, with the last card we were just looking at. So maybe elves and goblins can put their differences aside to create a really powerful Naya deck with maybe Jetmir and Rabble Rousing in the mix too, because like, that could very easily be a thing. I don't know, why not? It's pretty cool. So when Rulik has Menace, now a 3/3 for 4 is actually very bad on rate these days. It's unfortunate, but it is what it is. But whenever they attack, you look at the top card of your library. If it's a land, you just get it for free. It's on the battlefield, that's it. If it's not, you then create a token, which is just cool. And you get intel on the top of your deck. So that's relevant as well. I think this card is actually pretty decent. I mean, we're seeing cards now in the current design, the current power level. We see a lot of cards that get you cards. That's something that is just really important. Like if a card is going to see play in Constructed, it needs to have an immediate impact on the board or somehow generate card advantage for you, preferably both. But in this case, Rulik Mons, yes, you get a 3/3 body on board right away, but you're probably not going to be blocking. The real benefit is when you start swinging. That's really where you want to be. So it doesn't necessarily do something as soon as it hits the board. It's also not great if you're behind. Like if you're in a situation where you're forced to block with this guy, it feels pretty bad. You definitely want to be on the beatdown. You want to be the one attacking here. So this is potentially a curve topper in a Gruul aggro deck. To be honest, I don't think it's going to be that great for Constructed, but in Limited, keep an eye out for this thing. I think it's going to be pretty solid. But again, actually in our token style deck, and maybe a ramp deck, there might be something to it. The fact that it ramps you is, I mean, this feels like, what was it, Rata? Yeah, the Rata War Chief of Keld or whatever. Like, this feels very much like Rata at home. It's something. It's something. All right, next up, we have Rimely Interference. Now, I gotta be honest, I'm actually pretty jazzed about this card. It is an instant for 1 blue. Target creature gets -1/-0 until end of turn. If the spell was kicked, that creature blocks this turn if able. Draw a card. This card is not good. Do not be fooled. This card is not particularly good. If it did not say draw a card on it, I would say this card is completely and totally unplayable. But because it has those 3 words, the 3 most beautiful words of Magic the Gathering, they are on this card. Let's go. But additionally, the kicker is 1 and a red. So for 3 mana, a creature can get -1/-0, and it has to block this turn if able. So this could actually be a really cool 2-for-1 in a lot of situations, actually. So if you're in a scenario where you're attacking with a somewhat large creature, you can target their Reflection of Kiki-Jiki. Well, okay, maybe if they're tapped out, you could do that. But you could target an important combo piece that is untapped and available on the board. The reason that Reflection of Kiki-Jiki wouldn't be a great one is because they could tap the Reflection of Kiki-Jiki in response if they have a legit target for it, and then it could no longer block. So that's why I don't necessarily recommend you use that one, depending on the scenario. If it's their only creature, then go nuts. Like, get it out of there. Or if they're tapped out, then you can do that. But there are a lot of 1 and 2 drops that are relevant combo pieces that are important, like mana dorks, that kind of thing. This can just affect it. This is removal in Izzet in the right scenario if you have bodies on board that can attack. That said, I know it's not good. I know it's not good. But the fail case on this card is if there's a creature on the battlefield, at instant speed, you pay 1 blue, you give that creature -1/-0, it can even be your own, and then you draw a card. It kind of cycles itself. Like 1 mana cantrips, generally not bad. So I think this is one of those cards. It might see play in some weird fringe decks, but I think in Limited, if you get blown out by this, it's gonna suck. It's gonna happen. People are gonna get blown out by this. This is kind of jank I'm gonna try to build around. Just watch. We're gonna try it. I don't know. We'll see. We'll see. But I think it's a fun card. It's a fun design. I like this design a lot, actually, where a card is decent, but then like if you kick it, it kind of does something else and becomes significantly more powerful if you add an additional color. I think it's just cool. Anyway, next up, we have an uncommon from the set that I actually think is incredibly potent, and that is Twinferno, which, I mean, okay, so fun pun aside, it is an instant for 1 and a red. choose one. When you cast your next instant or sorcery spell this turn, copy that spell. You may choose new targets for the copy, or target creature you control gains double strike until end of turn. The fact that both of these abilities are on a single card and it only costs 2 is bananas. The idea of granting double strike to something, we've seen that on cards in the past, like for 3. Like, the fact that this only costs 2 at instant speed is absolutely bananas. And on top of that, you copy your next instant or sorcery spell this turn. Any of them. The closest thing we get to this, the closest thing we've seen to that effect are cards like Teach by Example, which have to be 2 specific colors, or Dual Strike from Kaldheim, where not only is it 2 red if you're going to cast it, not unforetold, but to cast it straight up, it's red, and you can only copy a spell with mana value 4 or less. In this case, you can copy whatever spell you want, and it only costs 2. Now, we still have Galvanic Iteration in the format. I don't know that this, like, 100% replaces Galvanic Iteration in, like, is it combo decks that want that, just because it has Flashback. That makes it relevant. But I do think Twinferno could even slot into those decks as, like, a 5th and 6th copy of Galvanic Iteration, and we're going to see mono red burn decks or mono red aggro decks that want this, because if they have an open attack lane with like a 3-power creature, all of a sudden they're smacking for 6, or if they have a burn spell in hand that can go face, all of a sudden this can double it, and it can do that twice, or get 2 blockers out of the way. Like, this card is great, period. It is going to see play. Now, it is important to note, it does absolutely nothing by itself. However, what you need to follow it up is just an instant or sorcery, or a creature, preferably both, because then you get options. But I gotta say, this card is just great. It's absolutely fantastic. They're 2 very powerful effects on 1 competitively priced card. So keep an eye out for this thing. It's gonna be around. Twinferno, we're all gonna see Twinferno see play. Even in standard, this is gonna be a thing. Even in older formats, I wouldn't be surprised if it gets slotted into certain combo decks, like certain Spellslinger decks. Cult Conscript. This is a 2/1 for 1 skeleton warrior. It enters the battlefield tapped. Pay 2, return Cult Conscript from your graveyard to the battlefield. Activate only if a non-skeleton creature died under your control this turn. Now, that can be activated at instant speed. Pretty sweet. Don't forget that. I think this is going to be very, very valuable. I think this card is just going to be solid. In any kind of aggressive deck that has black in it, this could be a very useful piece. 2 power on the board for 1 mana is a good thing. It just is. I don't know what else to say. It's just good. And in a deck that cares about sacrificing stuff, whether you're sacrificing to casualty effects, whether you're sacrificing to trigger your Weatherlight, again, I keep going back to it because that card is just so good. But if you're sacrificing stuff, Cult Conscript is a body that, if you're especially if you're sacrificing to casualty, it satisfies casualty too. It can also crew up to 2. So all right, like the 2 power is very relevant. Not to mention you can also just smack your opponent in the face for 2 as early as turn 2. That always feels good, right? So it's got a lot of good things going for it, just by the fact that, just with the stat line alone. And you can sacrifice it to satisfy things, then bring it back as you sacrifice other things to satisfy other effects. Like, so this has some cool synergies. Also, you're in a situation where if your opponent kills one of your creatures, you can actually follow that up by bringing your Cult Conscript back, because this can be activated at instant speed. It doesn't say you have to activate it only on your turn. So if your opponent kills one of your things, or if you block, like and one of your creatures dies, you can then pull Cult Conscript just back to the battlefield. Now, unfortunately, that card can't be a skeleton. So this looks like it should fit in a skeletal swarming deck, but it doesn't, which is really unfortunate because that deck produces a ton of skeletons. So here we are. Although skeleton swarming are going to be rotating out of standard specifically, but still, like, that kind of effect, I want to be going wide with stuff, and I want to be able to pull that stuff. I want that stuff to be able to be sacrificed to various benefits, and to be able to just pull Cult Conscript back out of my graveyard. So I think it's decent. If that said non-skeleton, although the reason that it says skeleton is actually very simple. If it said activate only if a creature died under your control this turn, you could pull it back from itself, which could be problematic. Even if it said activate only if another creature died under your control this turn. Then you wouldn't be able to sacrifice the Cult Conscript and then just pay to have it back immediately. But if you had 2 of them, then all of a sudden, turn after turn, they could satisfy the other one's triggers. And they didn't want that, is my guess. And so as a result, we have the situation where they can't key off of skeletons, which is a little unfortunate. But to be honest, it's not a particularly common creature type anyway. So your decks probably aren't going to have a ton of skeletons unless you're specifically trying for skeleton tribal. And if you're specifically trying for skeleton tribal, then all this is a 2-1 for 1 tapped when it ETBs, which might actually be fine still, but not great. It's also a warrior, which is a relevant creature type as well. It's something that we see, you know, that's relevant in a number of situations too, like the warrior equipment deck, especially in historic, where it recently, well, a couple months ago now, but got a rebalance boost. You know, there might be something there. Anyway, this has been a ton of fun. Thank you for checking out the video. I appreciate it very, very much. We have more spoilers coming, and I will definitely cover them as we get them. But in the meantime, craft those Weatherlights, folks. That card is going to be a house. We are going to see it. I have a feeling we are all going to get sick of it very, very soon. Except me, because I'm just going to be abusing it until the cows come home. And Cult Conscript could absolutely be part of that deck. We'll see. But thank you so much for checking out the video. I appreciate it. If you have not already subscribed and you made it to the end of the video, it would help me so much if you did. We are approaching the 1,000 subscriber mark, and once we hit that, I'll actually be able to submit an application for the YouTube Partner Program, which means all those ads you have to sit through might actually start converting into money into my pocket. So that would help me out a ton. I'd really appreciate it. Thank you so much, and I'll catch you on the next one.